The room went quiet the second she walked in. Not because she was loud. Not because she demanded it, but because there's a kind of silence that happens when something doesn't fit, when a thing is so out of place that the air itself seems to stop and reconsider. She was wearing a coat that had seen better decades. Dark wool, slightly pilled at the elbows. The kind you find at a church rummage sale for $4 and think, this will do. Her shoes were clean but flat, sensible, the shoes of a woman who had spent a lifetime on her feet doing work that mattered to other people. She carried a cloth tote bag with the logo of a grocery store chain that had closed in 2009. And she walked into the Hargrove Culinary Institute's annual benefactor dinner like she had every right to be there. Which, as it turned out, she did. Her name was Loretta Baines, 57 years old. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Cincinnati, the kind of neighborhood where the corner store has bulletproof glass at the register and the neighbors still bring each other food when somebody gets sick. She had worked in hospital cafeterias for 22 years. Before that, a school lunch program. Before that, a diner on Route 9 that her aunt owned, where she learned to cook before she learned long division. She had not been invited to the benefactor dinner. She had been hired to wash dishes. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I want you to understand what the Hargrove Culinary Institute was, what it meant, what it cost to walk through those doors as anything other than staff. The Hargrove was not a cooking school. Not really. It was a sorting machine. It took in the children of money and influence, polished them with technique and pedigree, and sent them back out into the world stamped with a credential that opened restaurant deals, James Beard nominations, Food Network contracts. Tuition was $41,000 a year. The waiting list was 18 months. The scholarship program was, according to the website, robust and inclusive. It had produced, in the last 6 years, 3 scholarship recipients. All 3 had quietly left before completing the program. The dining room where the benefactor dinner was held seated 200 people. The tables had fresh flowers that cost more than Loretta's monthly grocery budget. The wine started at $300 a bottle. The guest of honor that evening was Chef Preston Hargrove III, grandson of the founder, whose cooking had never fed anyone who actually needed to eat. His name in that world was not just a name, it was a door. It was a ceiling. It was a hand that waved you in or waved you away, depending on something he decided in the first 4 seconds of meeting you, some calculation that had nothing to do with what you could do with a pan and everything to do with whether he recognized you as someone who belonged. He had decided a long time ago about people like Loretta. He didn't know he had. He had never thought about it once. She had taken the dishwashing shift as a favor. Her nephew Deshaun worked the catering company that supplied the evening staff, and someone had called out sick. She needed the extra $140. Her refrigerator compressor had been making a sound for 3 weeks that she knew was a goodbye sound, and so she had said yes. She had borrowed a black uniform top from Deshaun, tucked her hair under a net, and taken the 47 bus across town. The kitchen at the Hargrove that night was a different world from the dining room. Loud, hot, organized chaos, the clatter of hotel pans and the sharp call of ticket orders, and the kind of controlled pressure that people who have never worked a real kitchen don't understand. Loretta understood it in her bones. She moved through that kitchen the way water moves through a familiar channel, quick and quiet and sure. She was good at this. She had always been good at this, not washing dishes, though she was efficient at that too, but being in a kitchen. Reading it, feeling where the pressure was building, where someone needed a hand, where a station was about to fall behind. At around 8:30, one of the line cooks, a young woman named Aisha, cut her hand on a mandolin. Not badly, but enough that she had to step back, enough that her station, the amuse-bouche course, 12 plates of a chilled corn bisque with a smoked paprika oil, was sitting half-finished with 30 covers about to be called. Loretta looked at the plates. She looked at Aisha. She looked at the corn bisque on the stove. She finished the plates. She didn't ask. She just moved. 12 perfect portions, each one finished with a ribbon of the smoked paprika oil and a single micro-celery leaf, exactly the way the first 6 had been plated. She set them in the pass and stepped back to the sink. Nobody said anything. In a kitchen at service, you don't stop to applaud. But the expediter, a thin man named Connell who had been running passes for 11 years, looked at the plates, looked at Loretta, and gave her one nod, the kind that meant, "I see you." What happened next was not Loretta's fault. It was the fault of architecture and poor timing. The door between the kitchen and the dining room swung open at the exact moment. Loretta was carrying a rack of clean wine glasses to the staging shelf near the pass, and Chef Preston Hargrove III walked through it. He was not supposed to be in the kitchen during service. He was supposed to be in the dining room being admired, which was his primary function at these events. But he had heard, from somewhere, that the amuse-bouche was late and he had come to deliver consequences. He was tall, Preston Hargrove, thick through the shoulders in a way that looked less like physical work and more like the gym membership his wife had given him for Christmas 3 years running. He had gray at his temples that his publicist called distinguished. He wore his chef's whites the way some men wear a uniform, as a costume, as a claim to something. He came through the kitchen door and he saw the rack of wine glasses, and he did not see the woman carrying them. He walked into her. The glasses did not break. Loretta's grip was too good, too practiced. She had been carrying things that mattered for too long to let them fall. But the rack tilted, and 3 glasses tipped, and the sound they made was enough to stop the kitchen for 1/2 second. Preston Hargrove looked at Loretta. He looked at her coat, which she had hung by the door, but whose outline was still somehow implied by everything about her. He looked at her hands on the rack. He looked at her face. "Watch where you're going," he said. He said it the way you say it to furniture that has inconvenienced you. He said it without waiting to see if she was hurt or startled or needed a moment. He said it, and then he looked past her, to the expediter, to the plates, to everything that mattered to him in that room. "Which one of my people finished the amuse-bouche?" he asked Connell. Connell glanced at Loretta, a flicker. Then, "Aisha's station. She had a small injury. We managed." Preston nodded. "Good. The presentation was acceptable." He looked at the kitchen generally, the way a man looks at a machine he owns. Then he walked back through the door. Loretta set the rack down carefully. She went back to the sink. She did not say a word. She was used to this. Not the collision, not that specifically, but the particular quality of invisibility that descended on a black woman in a service uniform in a room that was not built for her. The way a person could look directly at you and see only an obstacle. The way your whole lifetime of knowledge and capability could be reduced, in someone's eyes, to the color of your shirt and the hairnet on your head. She washed glasses for another hour. Then the dinner ended, and the staff began to break down, and something happened that was not in the plan for the evening. The Hargrove Institute held, at the end of each benefactor dinner, a small informal reception in the teaching kitchen adjacent to the main dining room. This was where Preston would hold court, take photographs with donors, discuss the Institute's upcoming programs. It was also where, each year, he would do a brief demonstration. Nothing formal, he always said, just something impromptu, just something off the cuff, that inevitably became the clip that ran in local food media the following week. This year, the theme he had announced was heritage and innovation. The Institute's new initiative to, as the brochure said, celebrate and elevate the culinary traditions of underrepresented communities. The brochure had a photograph of 3 students. One of them was black. That student had withdrawn from the program the previous semester, but the brochure was already printed. Preston stood in the teaching kitchen in front of 27 donors and their spouses, and he said, "The dish I'm going to demonstrate tonight is actually quite close to my heart. It's rooted in a very old tradition, the kind of slow, soulful cooking that I've been studying intensely for the past 2 years. What I've done is take that foundation and refine it, elevate it, bring it into a modern context." He uncovered the mise en place on the counter. Dried chiles, smoked pork, low-country aromatics, a cast-iron pot, the bones of a dish that people like Loretta's grandmother had been making before Preston Hargrove's grandfather was born. He began to cook. And here is the thing about Preston Hargrove. He was genuinely talented, That was the particular cruelty of it. He could cook. He had good hands, good instincts, a real sense of when a thing was ready. He had taken the food of other people's grandmothers and learned it faithfully, and he was going to stand in front of 27 donors and accept credit for its heritage with a smile that held not 1 degree of awareness of what he was doing. Loretta had been asked to stay an extra 40 minutes to help clear the reception setup. She was in the corner of the teaching kitchen, collecting napkins from a cart near the door. When she heard it, she heard the sizzle. She smelled the fat rendering from the smoked pork, the bloom of the dried chiles in oil, the particular moment when the aromatics hit the heat and released the smell that had been in her grandmother's kitchen in Anniston, Alabama, on every Sunday of her childhood. The smell of her mother's hands, the smell of her father coming home, the smell of every loss she had survived, and every meal she had cooked to get through it. She stopped moving. She stood there with a fistful of linen napkins, and she listened to Preston Hargrove explain, in his smooth Food Network voice, the cultural significance of what he was making. He used words like soul and legacy and community. He talked about his research. He talked about a 2-week trip he'd taken to South Carolina. He talked about honoring the tradition. He did not mention whose tradition it was. Loretta set the napkins down. She walked to the counter. There were 27 donors in that room. There was Preston Hargrove with his ladle. There was Connell by the door who had given her that one nod. There was a young woman in the corner, recording the demonstration on her phone. "Excuse me," Loretta said. Her voice was not loud. It had spent decades making herself heard in loud kitchens without raising it, a voice that had learned to carry. Preston turned. He saw her. He saw the hairnet. He saw the grocery store tote, which she had retrieved from the coat hook by the door. "The demonstration is for benefactors," he said, politely. The politeness of a man who has never had to be impolite, because everything has always moved out of his way. "I know," Loretta said. "I'm not here about the demonstration. I want to ask you something about the dish." He looked at her with the particular expression of a man making a calculation. How much of a scene will this make, and is it worth it to me to simply answer her? And he said, "Sure, go ahead." "That's a Gala red rice base you started with," Loretta said. "But you added the chile oil before the rice, not after." She said it the way you state a fact. No accusation in it, just fact. Preston blinked. "That's a technique I developed based on. My grandmother made this dish," Loretta said. Her name was Estelle Baines. She cooked it every Sunday for 40 years in the same cast iron pot her mother gave her. The chile oil goes in after the rice. "Before you get bitterness in the base," she wrote it down. The room had gone quiet in the way. Rooms go quiet when something real is happening. "I'm sure your grandmother was a wonderful home cook," Preston said. He smiled. 27 donors were watching. The young woman's phone was still recording. But what I'm demonstrating is a culinary evolution of that tradition, which involves— She didn't just write it down, Loretta said. She reached into the grocery store tote. She submitted it to a recipe archive in 1987 through the Smithsonian's Southern Foodways collection. She set a folder on the counter. Inside was a photocopy. She had learned a long time ago to always keep the photocopy of a 4-page handwritten recipe document with an accession number stamped in the corner. The original is in Washington. Estelle May Baines, Anniston, Alabama. Everything you're standing there calling your culinary evolution has her name on it. Preston looked at the folder. He looked at Loretta. He looked at the 27 donors. "That's a home recipe," he said. "That's not intellectual property. That's not—" "No," Loretta said. "It's not intellectual property. You're right about that. You can't steal a recipe. But you can stand in front of people and call something your heritage when it isn't. You can build a program around celebrating underrepresented culinary traditions and not know the name of a single person whose tradition you're celebrating." She looked at the folder, then back at him. "My grandmother never ate in a restaurant like yours. She never could have afforded to. But every dish that comes out of a kitchen like this one has a grandmother somewhere behind it. Most of those grandmothers never got a credit line." The young woman in the corner had not stopped recording. Preston opened his mouth. He closed it. For the first time in what was probably a very long time, the calculation wasn't working out. "I'm not trying to take your program from you," Loretta said. "I'm not trying to make a scene. I'm just telling you that my grandmother existed, that her name was Estelle, that she was a real person who knew exactly why the chile oil goes in after the rice, and she could tell you in 4 sentences the food science behind it, without a culinary degree, because she had been doing it since she was 9 years old." She looked at the cast iron pot. "You burned the base, by the way. You'll need to start that layer again." She picked up her folder. She picked up her tote bag. She nodded to Connell, who was standing by the door with an expression she had not seen on a white man's face in a long time, something that looked almost like shame. She walked out of the teaching kitchen, through the service hall, and out the side door of the Hargrove Culinary Institute into the Cincinnati night air, which smelled like October and bus exhaust, and, just faintly, like someone nearby was making something good. The video posted that night. The young woman's name was Simone Trask. She was a second-year student at the institute, the daughter of a caterer from Louisville, the first person in her family to attend a culinary school. She had been there as a volunteer at the benefactor dinner, hoping to network, hoping to be seen. She had pointed her phone at Preston Hargrove expecting to record something aspirational. She uploaded the video at 11:47 p.m. with no caption except a single line. Her name was Estelle. By morning, it had 400,000 views. By the following evening, the Smithsonian had issued a statement confirming the existence and date of the Estelle May Baines submission in their Southern Foodways archive. A food historian at Howard University appeared on a podcast and spent 40 minutes discussing the broader pattern of what she called culinary erasure, the systematic uncrediting of Black, Indigenous, and immigrant food traditions in professional culinary culture. The podcast got picked up by 3 national outlets. The Hargrove Institute's Heritage and Innovation brochure disappeared from their website on day 2. The 3-student photograph, the one with the student who had already withdrawn, disappeared with it. Preston Hargrove did not issue a statement for 4 days. When he did, it used the word context 11 times and the word sorry 0 times. His publicist quit. His wife, according to people who knew them, had been quiet for a very long time about a number of things, and this became the last one. Deshawn, who had gotten Loretta the dishwashing job, called her the morning the video hit 400,000 views and left a voicemail that was mostly just him saying, "Auntie, Auntie, Auntie, are you seeing this?" 6 times before he hung up and called back to say it again. She had been at work. She had a shift at the hospital cafeteria that started at 6:30, and she was not the kind of woman who called out because something was happening on the internet. She heard the voicemail on her lunch break, sitting on a plastic chair in the staff room with a container of soup she had made at home, a recipe of her own, one she had developed over 30 years of small adjustments and seasonal changes, and the particular wisdom of knowing exactly what a person needs to feel warm and seen and fed. She did not feel like a hero. She did not feel like a protagonist in a story. She felt tired and a little raw, the way you feel when you have said something true out loud that you have been carrying quietly for a long time. But she also felt something else. She felt her grandmother's hands. She felt every Sunday morning in that kitchen in Anniston, the weight of the cast iron pot, the specific sound of the dried chiles hitting hot oil. Her grandmother's voice saying, "Now watch, Babby. This is the part people get wrong," and then explaining, with the patience and precision of a woman who had taught this to 4 daughters and 11 grandchildren, exactly why the oil goes in after the rice. Estelle May Baines had never needed a culinary degree to know what she knew. She had needed time and repetition and love and the willingness to pass it on. She had written it down in 1987 because someone from the Smithsonian had come through Anniston asking old women if their recipes were worth saving, and Estelle had said, "Well, of course they are. Why wouldn't they be?" She had written her name at the top of every page, neat, unhurried cursive. Estelle May Baines, Anniston, Alabama, as if she knew, somewhere in the back of her practical and unillusioned mind, that someday someone was going to need to see it. 2 things happened in the weeks that followed that I want to tell you about. The first, the Institute's Scholarship Fund, the one that had produced 3 recipients in 6 years, received a donation of $250,000 from an anonymous source, designated specifically for students from communities whose culinary traditions were underrepresented in professional training. Someone at the Institute's board level, who had been in the teaching kitchen that night, had made some calls. Simone Trask was named the inaugural recipient of what would be quietly called, in the internal documents, the Estelle Award. Nobody announced it publicly. Nobody at the Institute was in a position to make announcements about things being named after other people just then. The second, a food writer from a magazine spent 3 hours in Loretta's apartment in October, eating soup and asking questions. Loretta talked about her grandmother for 2.5 of those hours. She talked about the recipe archive. She talked about the cast iron pot that Estelle had left to her mother, and her mother had left to her, which was sitting on the stove when the food writer arrived and would be sitting on that stove long after everyone in this story was gone. The article ran in January. It was called The Women Who Wrote It Down. It was about Estelle and Loretta and about 37 other women from across the American South, whose recipes sat in archival collections at universities and cultural institutions, documented and dated and signed, the evidence of a lifetime's knowledge that had been there all along, waiting for someone to go looking. It was not a revenge story. Loretta would tell you that herself if you asked her. She does not think of it as revenge. She thinks of it as correction, as a thing being returned to where it belonged. Preston Hargrove still runs the Institute. He is more careful now with his language. He has hired a cultural consultant. The Heritage and Innovation Program was relaunched with a curriculum committee that includes food historians and community practitioners, people who actually come from the traditions being taught. Whether any of it goes deep enough is a question that people who care about these things are still asking, and will probably be asking for a long time. Loretta went back to her shift at the hospital cafeteria the morning after her lunch break voicemail. She went back the morning after the article ran. She goes back every morning. She is not the story. She has always known that. Estelle is the story. And every woman like Estelle, every person who wrote their name at the top of a page and said, "This is what I know, this is where it comes from, this matters." Those are the people the story is about. The cast iron pot on Loretta's stove is 63 years old. It has cooked 10,000 meals. It does not care who gets credit, but the people who cooked in it did. And that's what I keep coming back to, after everything. Not the video, not the 400,000 views, not Preston Hargrove's statement, or his publicist quitting, or the scholarship fund, or the magazine article. What I keep coming back to is Estelle sitting at a kitchen table in Anniston, Alabama, in 1987, with a pen in her hand and 4 sheets of paper, writing down what she knew. Not because anyone important asked her to. Not because she expected recognition, but because someone came through town and said, "Is this worth saving?" And she said, "Of course it is." She wrote her name on every page. She described each step with the precision of someone who had made something so many times that she knew it from the inside out, who could tell you not just the what but the why, the watch for this, the here is where people go wrong, and here is how you don't. She handed those 4 pages to a stranger and went back to her kitchen. And 37 years later, her granddaughter walked into a room in Cincinnati and set a photocopy on a counter, and the stranger, who had needed to hear it, finally had to stop and listen. You cannot take what someone has already written down. You cannot erase a name that was placed with intention. What I want to ask you, and I mean this seriously, I want you to sit with this, is whether there is someone in your life whose knowledge you have been the beneficiary of without thinking much about it. A grandmother, a neighbor, an aunt who could cook rings around anyone with a culinary credential, someone who taught you something foundational, something you use every day, whose name you've never said out loud. To anyone who wasn't already in the room, say it, say their name, write it down if you have to, put it at the top of the page. Because the record only goes as far as the people who bothered to make one. Estelle May Baines bothered, and 37 years later, her name is still at the top of every page. If this story reminded you of someone, leave their name in the comments. I want to see it. I want every name that's been carrying this story to get a moment in the light. And if you believe that the people who built this country's food with their hands deserve to be remembered by name, not just by the food on the table, then share this story. Because that is the only algorithm that has ever actually mattered. One person deciding that something is worth passing on. Just like Estelle did.